So what did the other side think about the Democratic debate? The GOP, of course, was doing a little bit of recon last night.
We are joined now by Marc. He's the Director of Strategic Communications for Trump 2020, live from Ohio. Marc, welcome back to the show. Great to see you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so Marc, what did the Trump campaign make of the debate last night? I know the standard line is that he was always the biggest winner, but what are the particular issues that you thought moved the needle in the president's direction, in your view?
Well, I think any time that the Democrats are talking about taking private health insurance away from 180 million Americans, or 20 million American senior citizens getting kicked off their Medicare Advantage plans, sending police door to door to confiscate your guns. I mean, those are all kinds of things that when you're out here in the heartland of America, that doesn't add up to a winning message. So I think there's a good reason why they spent the first 15 minutes talking about impeachment, because the next 2 hours and 45 minutes showed they had no vision for America's future.
So, Marc, does that mean that you'd think like a Pete Buttigieg or an Amy Klobuchar, one of the more quote-unquote moderate candidates, would be a tougher threat to President Trump?
Well, I think they have a message that would probably better resonate with many people in the middle of America, but it's also pretty clear that neither of them are likely to be the nominee. You saw most of the field taking aim at Elizabeth Warren, their new front runner, and I'm not sure that the harsh spotlight of that glow actually did well for her yesterday.
And so what the president is talking a lot about right now is this impeachment matter. The stage was largely united on the matter of impeachment. Do you think that this will be one of the defining things that the president is going to focus on, or is it going to be about, the economy, about healthcare, and so much else?
Well, ultimately, when we get into the race next year, once we have a defined opponent, it'll get into the issues, and it'll be a choice for the American voters. Do you want to keep the jobs, the paychecks growing, the things that have happened in our country under President Trump, or do you want to go to all of the high taxes, government regulation, government intrusion into your life that the Democrats were talking about last night? But right now, everyone seems to be focused more on this inquiry, and you saw them united last night. It's interesting, though. I think that the only reason they're talking about that is because they know they are not going to be able to beat President Trump head-to-head next year with the policies that they're proposing.
So, Marc, you were making the case that things like Medicare for All, the sort of more leftist policies that are advocated by some of the Democrats, aren't popular out there in the country. But meanwhile, the candidate with the most individual donations, more even than your guy, Donald Trump, is Bernie Sanders, who has 1.4 million individual donations as opposed to Trump's about 1 million. So what does that say about the resonance of his message and how he would be as an opponent?
Well, I think from from Bernie's political base, that he is definitely a motivating factor to them. But again, this is not just about an election for your base. You've got to actually go out there and win the votes of the American people. And when it comes to comparing the policies, you have Bernie Sanders. At least he'll be honest with the American people. He's going to raise your taxes. He's going to raise your middle class taxes, where others like Elizabeth Warren refuse to admit that. But also, when you get into it, that's where this is actually going to be a choice. When you compare those policies, you tell people that your union negotiated health care benefits are no longer yours. You're going to get a government health care card rather than the private health insurance card that you've had through your employer, maybe for years or decades. So it's those kinds of basic choices when we get to this point next year that I think will be very stark for the American people.
Marc, I also do want to ask you how much we saw that the cash on hand numbers, they came out for the Democratic candidates, Joe Biden in particular, really hurting, only $9 million that's in the bank. What is the state of the Trump campaign finances, since we have you here to talk about it?
Well, we've got about a record $158 million cash on hand, according to the report filed last night, which is considerably more than Joe Biden's $9 million or even some of the other leading candidates. And it's allowing us to use that money to put resources onto the ground right now. You saw it last week. We're putting dozens of people in Minnesota. We have people in New Hampshire, Nevada, New Mexico, in addition to obviously all the other states that are on the map. But we're growing this map because of the president's overwhelming war chest of support, while many of the Democrats are just trying to keep the lights on.
Marc, our team on the ground spoke with candidate Andrew Yang last night. He talked about how he is winning over Trump supporters. Let's take a listen to that.
Well, I am one of only two candidates candidates on that stage tonight that 10% of Donald Trump voters said they would support in the general election. So if Democrats are looking for someone to beat Donald Trump, I'm as sure as a bet as there is on that stage tonight.
So the two candidates who have the most support of former Trump voters are Andrew Yang and Bernie Sanders. What do you make of that crossover?
Well, I think it's an interesting dynamic, as these two candidates are quite different from each other, and they're clearly different than the president of the United States. But once it gets down to policies, I mean, I think right now so many of these things are done on feelings in terms of momentum and energy, and Andrew Yang is definitely bringing a different voice to the table. But when it comes down to looking at their policies, the fact that Yang actually just wants to give people government money, take it away from people, give it to other people for just the mere fact that you're living. There's no work involved. There's no work requirements. It's just, here's some money, go spend wisely. I mean, that's just not the way the American society, the American experiment is based on. It's based on hard work.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mark. We really appreciate your insight, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Mark.
Look forward to it.
Coming up, Bernie has gotten perhaps the most powerful progressive endorsement out there. We're going to tell you who it is. You probably already know.
And the Q3 fundraising numbers are in. Some contenders, they had some great hauls. Others, well, not so much. We're going to break those numbers down when Rising continues.